Before we begin the story, let us know where you're watching from by leaving a comment below. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story. The first day of an internship is always a memorable event, either because everything goes perfectly or because everything goes terribly wrong. For Sophie Bennett, things were already going wrong before she even stepped into the Apex Corp building. First, the bus broke down. Then the taxi driver took the wrong route. And to top it all off, her heel got stuck in a grate on the sidewalk right in front of the building entrance. Now running late and with her hair looking like a bird's nest after battling the wind on the way to work, Sophie dashed across the lobby toward the elevator, which was just about to close. "Wait, hold it," she shouted as she sprinted like a rocket across the lobby. At the last second, she squeezed through the elevator doors, but her momentum was so strong that she crashed right into a tall man in a dark suit who was distracted on his phone. "Oh," Sophie exclaimed as she bumped into him. "What?" He barely had time to react before letting out a pained grunt. Sophie had stepped hard on his foot. Ouch, ouch, ouch. Sophie jumped back, grabbing onto the elevator wall for support. The man, still in shock over what had just happened, looked at his foot and then at Sophie with an expression of pure disbelief. "You stepped on me. It wasn't intentional." Sophie raised her hands. "But if it makes you feel any better, my foot hurts too." Before he could respond, his phone, which had flown out of his hand from the impact, hit the elevator floor with a loud thud. "Oh no." Sophie picked up the phone, praying it was still intact. The man snatched it back, gave her a sharp glare, and said coldly, "Fantastic, now my phone has also taken a solo flight." Sophie let out a nervous laugh. At least it survived, right? Modern phones are pretty tough. He pressed a side button, and the screen flickered. Cracked. Sophie held her breath. "Well, I guess your phone now has a unique design, custom made by Impact." The man let out a deep sigh and rubbed his temples, trying to stay calm. The elevator kept going up when suddenly it jolted and came to an abrupt stop. The lights flickered. Complete silence. Sophie swallowed hard. Is this part of the decor?" The man ignored the joke and impatiently pressed the emergency button. "The elevator stopped," he said, clearly trying to stay composed. Sophie's eyes widened. "Yeah, I noticed. My first day and I'm already stuck in an elevator with a stranger. This has to be divine punishment for spilling coffee on my resume." The man gave her a suspicious look. "How does someone spill coffee on their own resume?" "Oh, it was an accident. But luckily, HR only read half of it before the ink smudged." Sophie grinned. "What about you? How did you end up here?" He raised an eyebrow. I took the elevator." She sighed. "Wow, really? I never would have guessed." The man looked up at the ceiling as if asking the heavens for patience. "I worked here." "Oh, so you must know the emergency exit protocol. What do we do now? Shout for help? Send smoke signals?" "We wait," he replied dryly. Sophie crossed her arms. "That's boring." "Well, we're in an elevator, not a comedy show." Her eyes widened. "Speaking of which, do you like stand-up comedy?" The man looked at her as if she had just asked if he was an alien. "No." "Oh, that's a shame. I love it. There's this comedian who jokes about corporate meetings. He's brilliant. He says that bosses always say, 'Let's handle this over email,' but no one ever responds to emails. Have you ever ignored emails?" "You talk a lot." "I talk a lot when I'm nervous," Sophie admitted, frowning. "My brain sort of switches to AM radio mode and starts broadcasting every thought I have. That's a problem. I'd say it's an unrecognized talent." The intercom finally crackled, and a receptionist's voice echoed through the speaker. "Folks, we had a small malfunction. The elevator should be back up and running in about 5 minutes." "Great." The man leaned against the wall, impatient. Sophie sighed dramatically. 5 minutes is enough time to reflect on life. "Tell me something. Have you ever done anything really embarrassing?" He blinked. "Why would I tell you that?" "Because we're stuck here. And according to the unofficial elevator code, when two people get trapped together, they have to share embarrassing secrets." "I've never heard of that code." "Of course not. Because I just made it up, but the rule still stands." He stared at her, unable to believe he was having this conversation. "All right, I'll play along." Sophie leaned in eagerly. "Go on." "When I was a kid," he crossed his arms, "I fell into a hotel pool during a trip because I wanted to see if it was possible to walk on water." Sophie broke into a big smile. "My God, did you think you were Jesus?" "I thought I had read something about water's surface tension and wanted to test it." "That's incredible." "Wrong, but incredible." The elevator gave a slight jolt before continuing its ascent. Sophie clapped excitedly. "We're free." The man shook his head, looking relieved to be rid of her. When the doors opened on the 20th floor, he stepped out first. Sophie followed right behind, adjusting her hair as if nothing had happened. At the reception desk, she was greeted by a smiling assistant. "You must be the new intern. Mr. Carter wants to speak with you before you start." Sophie froze. "Mr. Carter?" The assistant pointed toward a glass office, and there he was, the man from the elevator, the CEO of the company, William Carter. Sophie held her breath. Oh well, now I'm definitely getting fired. She wanted to dig a hole and hide in it forever. If only the elevator had stayed stuck for another hour, or if lightning had struck at that exact moment, anything would have been better than walking into that man's office right after stepping on him, making him drop his phone, and forcing him to listen to her theories about elevator secrets. The CEO's assistant smiled. "You can go in. He's expecting you." Expecting me to fire me, Sophie thought. She forced a smile and stepped inside. William Carter was seated behind a spotless desk, looking very different from the annoyed man in the elevator. His suit was still perfect, his hair neatly in place, and his serious expression unchanged. He looked up at her. "Oh, you again." Sophie gave a nervous smile. The walking disaster in person. William gestured for her to sit. "Sophie Bennett, right?" She nodded, trying to maintain some dignity. "Yes, sir. But if you need to pretend I never existed for the sake of your sanity, I completely understand." He ignored the comment. "You've been approved for an internship in the project analysis department. That means handling reports, presentations, and meetings." Sophie nodded, hoping he wouldn't bring up the elevator incident. "I was told you're proactive." She blinked. "They said that? Is that good news?" "Depends." William folded his hands on the desk. "If proactive means you'll spill less coffee than the office average, then yes." She blushed. "I solemnly swear to spill coffee no more than twice a week." William didn't laugh. "You'll be working under Emma, the department manager." He looked directly at her. "And try not to start a fire." Sophie's eyes widened. "That's happened before?" "No. But with you, one can never be too sure." She opened her mouth to protest, but quickly realized she had no defense. "Fair enough." He gestured toward the door, ending the meeting. "You can go, and please try not to step on anyone on your way out." Sophie hurried out of the office. She had done it. She hadn't been fired on her first day. That was already a victory. As soon as she arrived at the project analysis department, she realized she was already a bit of an office celebrity. The whispers were loud enough to hear. "It's her, the intern who almost killed the CEO. I heard she threw his phone out the window." "That's an exaggeration. It was just on the floor." "Shh. She's looking." Emma, the department manager, walked over. "Welcome, Sophie." Sophie smiled politely. "Thank you. I'm really excited to start." Emma nodded but seemed a little hesitant. "I hope so. Just a heads up, our department is very structured. People here are extremely organized." Sophie smiled. "Oh, of course. I'm super organized too." At that exact moment, her bag slipped from her shoulder and knocked over a stack of documents from a colleague's desk. Paper scattered everywhere. The silence was deafening. "Oh," Sophie mumbled. "That was a test." Emma sighed. "I'll show you to your desk." She handed Sophie a folder. "Here are some reports you need to organize and review. It's simple. Just put the documents in order, check the spreadsheets, and enter everything into the system." "Sounds easy," Sophie grinned. "Great. We need it done in 3 hours." Emma walked away, leaving Sophie to her first task. She opened the folder and found dozens of pages filled with charts and complex tables. "All right, I can do this." She took a deep breath and started sorting the papers. 5 minutes later, "I definitely cannot do this." The charts looked like ancient mystical runes. The tables had more numbers than a rocket's instruction manual, but Sophie wasn't going to give up. "I need a plan," she thought. So she had a brilliant idea. She grabbed some colorful sticky notes and started labeling spreadsheets with funny names to help her remember what each one was about. The depression spreadsheet, because the numbers just kept dropping. The sadness chart, because it looked like a downward spiral. The bankruptcy tables, self-explanatory. Proud of her revolutionary system. She kept working. Sophie was so focused that she didn't even notice when Emma walked back in. "How's it going?" Sophie jumped in surprise, and in the process knocked over her cup of coffee right onto the documents. Emma's eyes widened. "Sophie, I can explain." Sophie grabbed napkins frantically, but it was too late. The tables were completely smudged. The whole office went silent. "Oh my God." Someone murmured. Emma rubbed her temples. How much coffee do you drink per day? Not enough to handle this. She took a deep breath. Okay, reprint everything and redo the notes. Sophie sighed in relief. So I still have a job? Emma posed. For now. After an entire afternoon fixing the disaster, Sophie finally finished her work. As she got up to deliver the documents to Emma, she heard murmurs in the office. The CEO is coming. William Carter walked into the department like a king inspecting his kingdom. Everyone immediately straightened up. Sophie tried to look professional, but her nerves got the best of her, and she dropped the stack of documents right at William's feet. He looked at the papers on the floor, then at Sophie. She gave him an awkward smile. Oh, he again. William took a deep breath. Do you have something against documents? She quickly crouched down to pick them up. No. I love documents. They're so rectangular. He raised an eyebrow. Rectangular? Yes, and printed. Very nice. He looked at her completely baffled. Good to know. He grabbed a report and flipped through it. These numbers. He paused. Why is this chart labeled the sadness chart? The office fell into absolute silence. Sophie felt her soul leave her body. I can explain. William slowly closed the report. This better be a really good explanation. The entire room held its breath. Sophie's face got so hot, she was sure she could fry an egg on her forehead. There he was, William Carter, the most intimidating CEO in CEO history, holding a report with a chart named the Sadness Chart, and looking at her like he was trying to decide if this was a prank or a patience test. She opened her mouth to explain, but her brain went into emergency mode and refused to come up with anything useful, so she just blurted out, "Well, if I were a chart, that's what I'd be called too." The office remained dead silent. William pinched the bridge of his nose, as if asking the universe for strength. Why exactly did you name the spreadsheets like this? Sophie swallowed hard. Well, Mr. Carter, numbers can be so cold, so I gave them personality. Now they're charts with feelings. Personality? She nodded enthusiastically. Yes. Look, the sadness chart shows a huge drop in performance, so the name makes total sense. And the bankruptcy table? A tragedy. We need to feel the impact of these numbers to truly understand their story. William blinked. You just described financial reports like a soap opera. Sophie gave a sheepish smile. With the right soundtrack, it would be even better. William wasn't sure if he should laugh or terminate her contract on the spot. Change the names. Now. She nodded so fast she looked like a trained penguin. Right away, sir. He gave the intern one last look before walking out of the room, muttering something about how the company kept attracting chaos geniuses. As soon as the door closed, the office erupted in whispers. Oh my God, you survived. I thought he was going to fire you on the spot. Seriously, who labels a corporate report the sadness chart? Sophie sighed and collapsed into her chair. Well, at least he didn't throw a stapler at me. I'd call that a win. Because of the spreadsheet chaos, Sophie had to stay late organizing the documents. Let's have some fun with those who only read the comments. Type popcorn in the comments. Only those who made it this far will get it. Now let's continue with the story. Looking around, she realized the office was nearly empty. Only a few lights were still on, and the sound of keyboards echoed in the quiet space. She was exhausted. Okay, Sophie, just finish this and go home. But there was one small problem. She couldn't focus anymore. Her eyes started to get heavy, and that's when she had a brilliant idea. I need a boost. Something to help me stay awake and motivated. And what was the best way to stay awake? Music. Sophie put on her headphones, opened her maximum energy playlist, and hit play. The moment the beat started, she couldn't resist. Without realizing it, she began moving her shoulders to the rhythm. Then came her arms, and then her legs. Within minutes, Sophie was dancing alone in the middle of the office, spinning around the desk, clapping to the beat. And pretending her stapler was a microphone, she did a dramatic spin, and caught up in the moment, slid across her swivel chair like a rock star in the middle of a concert. And that's when she heard a noise. A quiet cough. Sophie froze. Still holding the stapler as a microphone, she slowly turned around. And there he was, William Carter, standing at the door, looking at her with an unreadable expression. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Sophie felt like her soul was leaving her body and catching the first flight to another planet. Maybe if I pretend to be a statue, he'll just walk away. But William didn't walk away. Quite the opposite, he crossed his arms and tilted his head. Well, that was unexpected. She dropped the stapler. I can explain. He raised an eyebrow. I'd love to hear this. She thought fast. Well, studies show that dancing improves productivity. What studies? Oh, lots of them. Respected scientific research published by experts in productive dancing. William couldn't hold back a smile. You just made that up. Yes. But it sounds convincing, doesn't it? He shook his head, still trying not to laugh. Tell me something, Bennett. Is this part of Apex Corp's corporate culture? Oh, absolutely. It's a secret tradition. All employees dance alone when no one's watching. William let out a short, quiet laugh. But Sophie noticed he laughed. And it was real. She felt a small sense of pride about that. William sighed and checked his watch. Just finished that report. She gave a playful salute. Yes, sir. He started to leave. But before closing the door, he glanced at her one last time. Oh, and Sophie? She looked at him. That spin in the chair was impressive. Then he walked out. She stood there, blinking. Did her CEO just compliment her office dance moves? She looked at the chair. Maybe I should practice that more often, but just to be safe. Only when no one was watching. William left the office and walked down the hallway. He still couldn't believe what he had just seen. Sophie dancing, spinning in her chair like she was in her own private concert, holding a stapler as a microphone. He should have been annoyed. But instead, to his surprise, he laughed, and that unsettled him. He wasn't the kind of guy who laughed easily. He was a CEO, a serious man, practical, rational, but that intern, she was a charming disaster, and he didn't know what to think about that. Deep down, he knew one thing. That scene wouldn't be leaving his mind anytime soon, and that was concerning. But for now, he preferred not to think about it. The next morning, Sophie walked into the office trying to keep a low profile. It was hard to act normal after what had happened the night before. Every time she closed her eyes, the memory flashed back, spinning in her chair, holding a stapler as a microphone, and William Carter standing at the door, watching it all. She took a deep breath. She had to move on. The office was busy, and everyone seemed focused, which was great. No one was saying anything about her, which meant no one knew about her little private performance yet, at least not yet. She sat down and started organizing the day's files. Then Emma showed up with a slightly suspicious smile. Do you have plans for tonight? Sophie found the question odd. Me? Plans? Emma nodded. The CEO needs someone to join him for dinner with a potential investor. Sophie blinked. And why me? Because the investor asked to meet someone from the project analysis department, and you were the only one available. A chill ran down her spine. Wait. This CEO you're talking about, he's about 6 foot tall, has an intimidating stare, and an incredible talent for catching people dancing at the wrong time. Emma stared at her. That's the one. Sophie wanted to sink into her chair. I can't go. I have a commitment. What commitment? I have to feed my fish. You have a fish? No, but I could. Emma sighed. You don't have a choice. You'll be there at 8. Sophie spent the rest of the day trying to come up with excuses, but when the clock hit 7:30, she knew she was out of options. She arrived at the restaurant precisely at 8 o'clock, only to realize it was one of those expensive places where a single dish cost as much as her rent. The lighting was dim, the atmosphere sophisticated, and the waiters wore white gloves. She felt out of place just breathing in there. William was already seated at a table in the corner. When he saw her, he simply raised an eyebrow, not looking surprised at all. She walked over and sat down. Before you say anything, I just want to make it clear that I'm here under duress. Good to know. I'll have the waiter write that down. She picked up the menu and glanced at the prices. My God, there's a dish here that costs more than my refrigerator. If you want, you can order it. I'd rather keep my fridge. At least it doesn't disappear after 5 minutes. William closed his menu and observed her for a moment. Do you always talk this much when you're nervous? Yes. And when I'm excited. And when I'm bored. And when I'm well. Basically always. I noticed. The waiter arrived and took their orders. Sophie tried to look professional, but she couldn't ignore how ridiculously at ease William seemed in this place, while she was still figuring out how to hold the silverware properly. The investor hadn't arrived yet, leaving just the two of them stuck in an unexpected dinner. So, William began, have you come up with any new nicknames for the reports? I'm controlling myself, but I do have a chart saved in my drafts called The Roller Coaster of Despair. He shook his head, but for the first time, he actually seemed to be enjoying the conversation. The dinner continued with a surprisingly light atmosphere. William seemed less rigid than usual, and Sophie even started to relax, but, as always, something had to go wrong. When the main course arrived, the food looked delicious, But after the first bite, something was off. William cleared his throat and raised a hand to it. "Are you okay?" Sophie asked. He nodded, but his eyes were starting to water. "William, you're turning red. It's under control. Are you allergic to something?" He hesitated before answering. "Shrimp." A passing waiter nearly dropped his tray when he heard that. "But sir, your dish contains shrimp." Sophie's eyes widened. "You ordered something you're allergic to?" William looked uncomfortable. "I didn't notice." Sophie lost her patience. "You didn't notice? How does someone who's allergic not realize they're ordering exactly what they can't eat?" He cleared his throat. "I was distracted." "You could have died from distraction." The waiter quickly stepped in. "We can bring you an antihistamine, sir." Sophie stood up. "No need. I have one in my bag." William looked at her, skeptical. "You carry allergy medication with you?" "I like to be prepared. Or just accident-prone." She pulled out the medicine and handed it to him. "Here, take this before I have to call an ambulance and end up in the headlines as inexperienced intern kills CEO in fancy restaurant." William took the pill, and after a few minutes, the redness started to fade. The investor finally arrived, but the dinner had already been a complete disaster. As they left the restaurant, William sighed. "Well, that was an interesting dinner." "Yes, I learned a lot." He raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" "That you don't pay enough attention to your food orders, and that I'm an excellent rescuer of reckless CEOs. He gave a faint smile. "I'll make a note of that in my next report." She laughed. "Please list it as Food Catastrophe Prevention Plan." He shook his head, but he didn't look annoyed. "Good night, Sophie." "Good night, boss." She turned and walked away, but she felt like something had changed. William also stood there for a moment, watching her go. He still wasn't sure what to make of this clumsy, impossible-to-ignore intern. But one thing was certain. She had a unique way of turning any situation into a full-blown spectacle. The next morning, Sophie arrived at the office feeling more confident than she had in previous days. Despite the occasional disaster, she was still employed, and for some unknown reason, William Carter didn't seem to want to throw her out the window. Considering last night's dinner, where she had practically saved his life, maybe he was even starting to see her differently. She walked through the project analysis department and sat at her desk, taking a deep breath. She was determined to have a calm, mistake-free day, but her plans started falling apart the moment Emma appeared beside her with a serious expression. "You're going to be working directly with the CEO this week." Sophie blinked a few times, waiting for Emma to burst out laughing and say it was just a joke. But her boss didn't seem the least bit amused. "What do you mean?" "He wants you to review some reports from the technology department and put together a summary for him." Sophie frowned. "Me?" "Yes, but I'm just an intern. He specifically asked for you." Sophie's stomach did a flip. William wanted her to work directly with him after everything she had done in the past few days. What was going on? "Are you sure he doesn't just want me to go organize the IT room cables?" "Positive." With no other choice, she grabbed her materials and headed to the executive floor where the CEO's office was. When she walked in, she found William sitting behind a massive glass desk, flipping through a report. He looked up as she entered. "Are you here ready to do serious work or for another comedy scene?" Sophie pressed her lips together and set the folder on his desk. "I'll focus to avoid any blunders." "That must take a monumental effort." She sat down and began reviewing the documents William handed her. To her surprise, the work was actually interesting. He wanted her to summarize several proposals for a new expansion project, highlighting their strengths and weaknesses. For a while, everything went relatively smoothly. Sophie managed to concentrate, and once she was fully immersed in the reports, she even forgot he was there. But then, as if the universe simply wouldn't allow her a moment of peace, her pen slipped from her hand and fell to the floor. She bent down to pick it up and, in the process, hit her head on the edge of the desk. The impact was strong enough to make her let out a small grunt. William glanced at her over his papers. "Are you okay?" "Perfectly. Just testing my forehead's durability." He sighed and went back to his report, as if he were already used to this kind of thing from her. After a few hours of work, William finally closed one of the files and looked at her. "What did you think of the reports?" Sophie flipped through her notes and started explaining. "The development team's proposal looks interesting, but there are some gaps in the budget. They're estimating a cost lower than what would realistically be needed for the project's implementation." He nodded. "And the other proposal?" "The innovation team has a solid concept, but their timeline is unrealistic. They're expecting a delivery no one could meet without doubling the team." William studied her notes for a moment. "You did a good job." Her eyes widened. "What? A good job?" Sophie smiled. "Was that a compliment?" "Don't get used to it." She laughed. "I'll remember it forever." The rest of the day went surprisingly well. Even with a few occasional blunders, Sophie managed to contribute to meetings and organize the information William needed. However, there was a problem. The entire office had started noticing that William was paying more attention to her than usual. Gossip started spreading through the halls. During a coffee break, Sophie noticed her colleagues whispering while looking in her direction. "Did you see?" He called her in again to review the reports. "No way. William never takes an interest in anyone like this. Do you think something's going on?" Sophie nearly spilled her coffee when she heard that. What were they implying? She needed to make it clear that this didn't mean anything. William was her boss, that was all. But the more she tried to ignore the rumors, the more they seemed to grow. During a department meeting, someone jokingly suggested placing bets on how long it would take for William and Sophie to get involved. Her reaction was immediate. "Wait. What?" Emma tried to hide her smile. "Don't worry. It's just a joke." "A joke? This is turning into a reality show." "Well, no one has ever seen the CEO act like this before." Sophie buried her face in her hands. "He's just testing me to see if I can do the job properly." "Sure, of course." She looked at Emma, who didn't seem convinced. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing. Just that he doesn't usually test people like this." The rumors kept spreading, and to make things worse, Sophie started noticing that William seemed more relaxed around her. During meetings, he not only listened to her suggestions but also asked questions and discussed ideas openly. If she made a mistake, he wasn't as strict with her as he was with others, and that only fueled the gossip even more. One afternoon, while reviewing a file, Sophie noticed William watching her with a thoughtful expression. "What?" He raised an eyebrow. "Nothing. I'm just wondering how someone so chaotic can be so efficient at the same time." She smiled. "It's a rare gift." He closed one of the reports and leaned back in his chair. "I have to admit, you've brought a little energy to the office." She crossed her arms. "Are you saying I'm a hurricane?" "Yes. But a hurricane that somehow organizes files in the middle of the destruction." She laughed. "I'll take that as a compliment." It seemed like an ordinary exchange, but for the office staff who were used to William's serious and reserved demeanor, it was practically a live performance. Every conversation between the two was analyzed with the same excitement as a championship game. Sophie wasn't sure what was stranger, the gossip, or the fact that somehow William didn't seem to care about it. She wondered if he even realized how much people were talking. If he did, he seemed determined to ignore it, which was exactly what she should be doing. But for some reason, it was hard to ignore the way he sometimes looked at her, as if he were trying to figure out something even he couldn't quite explain. And that alone was enough to make her uneasy. Sophie was used to being the center of attention in the office, but nothing could have prepared her for the level of speculation that took over the company after that week. Just her presence on the executive floor was enough to make employees exchange suspicious glances. Every time she left the CEO's office, she'd catch whispers in the hallways and little smirks hidden behind computer screens. She tried to ignore it. She was there to work, not to fuel gossip. But some conversations were impossible to tune out. "I heard the CEO is getting married." Sophie nearly choked on her coffee. "What?" The two employees who had been chatting froze when they realized she was nearby. "Oh, you didn't know?" Sophie blinked. "No, and I don't think I'm the only one." "Well, apparently it's an arranged marriage. A contract between wealthy families or something like that." Sophie crossed her arms. "That sounds like something out of a soap opera, but it makes sense. William is very private. He's never been seen in a public relationship." Sophie stayed quiet. It wasn't any of her business, of course, but for some reason, the thought made her uneasy. The rest of the day dragged on. Her productivity plummeted, and every time she tried to focus on reports, her mind wandered back to William's supposed mysterious fiancée. By the end of the day, she decided there was only one way to get answers. When she knocked on the CEO's office door and walked in, she found William, as always, focused on a report. He glanced up for a second before returning to his work. "Something wrong?" Sophie took a deep breath and got straight to the point. "Are you engaged?" William stopped writing. There was a long silence before he slowly set his pen down and leaned back in his chair, studying her with a curious expression. "What makes you think that?" She crossed her arms. "The whole office is talking about it." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Office gossip spreads faster than emails. So it's not true?" William hesitated a second longer than she would have liked. "Depends on how you look at it." Sophie frowned. "That's a very sophisticated way of saying, maybe." He gave a slight smile, as if he found the whole thing amusing. "And if it were true, would that change anything for you?" She blinked, caught off guard by the question. "No, It's just that she didn't know how to finish the sentence. William watched her reaction for a moment, then went back to his report as if the conversation was over. I think you already have your answer. Sophie left the office, not entirely sure what she was feeling. If it was true, why wouldn't he just say so? And why did the thought of him being engaged bother her so much? The next day, the rumors about his engagement only intensified. Some said the fiancée was a socialite from an influential family, while others insisted she was a mysterious businesswoman from abroad. Sophie tried to ignore it, but her brain wouldn't let her, and before she realized it, she found herself giving William relationship advice. It started innocently enough. If you really are engaged, you should plan something romantic to surprise her. William, who had been reviewing a contract, stopped mid-sentence and looked at her. Excuse me? I'm serious. You don't seem like the type to worry about these things. But women like unexpected gestures. Is that a proven fact, or just another one of your spontaneous theories? Common sense. He closed the contract and crossed his arms. And what kind of unexpected gesture would you recommend? A special dinner. Something well thought out with a personal touch. He was silent for a moment. A dinner then? Yes, but not just any dinner. It has to show that you really care. William rested his chin on his hand and studied her thoughtfully. All right, I'll plan a dinner. Sophie felt a tightness in her chest but forced a smile. That's great. The next day, she overheard a group of employees talking about a dinner William had supposedly planned for that evening. Herr Stomachsank. After all, she was the one who had suggested it. That was it. The company's CEO was going out for a romantic dinner with his mysterious fiancée, and it was all her fault. And then, without thinking, she decided she had to see it for herself. She took a taxi and discreetly headed to the restaurant they had mentioned. As soon as she arrived, she found a reserved table with an elaborate dinner setup waiting. But something was off. The table was empty, and then she felt someone approaching from behind. Sophie? She turned around and found William standing there, his expression a mix of amusement and disbelief. What are you doing here? She opened her mouth, but no reasonable answer came to mind. I heard about the dinner, and he raised an eyebrow, and decided to follow me. I just wanted to make sure everything was fine. He crossed his arms. All right, then tell me, where is my fiancée? Sophie blinked. I should be asking you that. William let out a sigh, grabbed a napkin, and placed it on the empty table. There is no fiancé. She froze. What? He gestured toward the empty table. This was the special dinner you suggested. Sophie felt her face burn. You were messing with me this whole time? William gave a subtle smile. I wanted to see how far you'd go with this story. She wanted to sink into the floor. I can't believe this. He picked up the menu and looked at her. Since you're here, we might as well have a real dinner. She hesitated, but then realized that deep down, she felt relieved. He wasn't engaged. He had just wanted to tease her, and for some reason, that thought made her smile. Sophie was still trying to process the revelation that the engagement story had been nothing more than one of William's jokes. What confused her even more was that he seemed to be enjoying her reaction, as if he had been waiting to see what she would do next. She slowly sat down, still a bit in shock. So this was all just a test? William flipped through the menu calmly. Not exactly a test, but I was curious to see what you'd do if you thought I was actually engaged. She narrowed her eyes. And what did you learn from it? He looked at her for a moment before answering, that you don't handle curiosity very well. Sophie huffed and picked up the menu, trying to focus on the food, but her heart was still racing not because he had fooled her, but because for some reason, she felt incredibly relieved to know he wasn't engaged to anyone. The waiter came to take their orders, and Sophie tried to act normal. Since I'm already here, I might as well enjoy it. But just so you know, I'm still mad at you. William gave a small smirk. Fair enough. Dinner started off calmly, with conversations about work and the challenges of the project they were reviewing. Sophie noticed that when William wasn't acting like the intimidating CEO, he could actually be good company. Tell me something, she said, cutting a piece of her meal. Why does no one seem to know anything about your personal life? You keep this air of mystery that drives people crazy with curiosity. He set his silverware down and gave her a small, knowing smile. Because the less people know about you, the less they have to speculate about. Well, it worked. But it also created an insane amount of rumor. People always like to make up stories when they don't have answers. Sophie smiled. I guess that's why they love gossiping about us so much. William studied her for a moment before responding. And what do you think about that story? She blinked, surprised by the question. What story? The one they're creating about us. She swallowed hard. Well, it's just a story, right? He nodded slowly, his eyes still locked on hers. If you say so. A brief silence filled the air, and Sophie felt the need to change the subject before the dinner took a turn she wasn't prepared to handle. So, do you have any hobbies? Anything you do outside of work? William thought for a moment. I like to cook. Her eyes widened. You're joking. He shook his head. It's one of the few times I can focus on something without being interrupted by emails and meetings. Sophie smiled. I never would have pictured you in a kitchen. I bet you have a super formal apron and only cook dishes worthy of a 5-star restaurant. He shrugged. I like simple dishes. The important thing is the flavor. So does that mean you make gourmet instant noodles? He chuckled softly. Never tried. But now I'm curious to see if that's a thing. She laughed genuinely. I can teach you. Dinner went on with unexpectedly light conversation. When they finished the meal, William called the waiter to pay, but Sophie stopped him. I should pay for my part. He raised an eyebrow. Who dragged you here in the first place? She rolled her eyes. You did. Then let me pay. She sighed but didn't argue. When they left the restaurant, the night was cold, and Sophie crossed her arms, regretting not bringing a jacket. William noticed and, without a word, took off his own jacket and placed it over her shoulders. She blinked, surprised. You don't have to do this. You're shivering. She lowered her head and held onto the jacket, catching his scent on the fabric. Thank you. They walked together to the parking lot in silence. When they reached William's car, he leaned against the door and looked at her. I have to admit something. She looked up at him. What? You have a natural talent for making a mess of everything around you. She laughed. Is that a compliment or a critique? A bit of both. She looked away, smiling. And you have a natural talent for leaving me speechless. He opened the car door for her, and Sophie got in, still holding the jacket over her shoulders. The ride back was quiet, but the silence between them didn't feel awkward. On the contrary, for the first time, they both seemed comfortable just sharing the same space. When William parked in front of her building, Sophie hesitated before getting out. Thanks for dinner. He nodded. It was more interesting than I expected. She smiled. I hope that's a compliment. He didn't reply, just watched as she stepped out of the car. She handed back the jacket, but before closing the door, leaned slightly toward him. Good night, William. He hesitated for a moment before answering. Good night, Sophie. She shut the door and walked into the building, feeling like something had changed that night, but she wasn't sure what. Sophie tried to return to her normal work routine after the unexpected dinner with William, but something felt different. She couldn't tell if it was just her perception or if something had actually changed in the way he treated her. The looks he gave her when passing by her department were subtle, but they were there. Before, William had only seemed intrigued by her behavior. Now it felt like he was analyzing something more. And to make matters worse, the office rumors had grown even stronger. Every time Sophie walked down the hall, she could hear the whispers getting louder. It wasn't just the fact that she worked directly with William that caught people's attention anymore. Now everyone was talking about the dinner they had found out about. During the coffee break, Emma approached her with a mischievous smile. So, you and the CEO have been going out together? Sophie nearly dropped her cup. What? No, Emma laughed. All right, I believe you. But half the office doesn't. I went to the restaurant by chance. That's all. Sure. And by chance, he was waiting for you with a reserved table. Sophie rolled her eyes. You're making this worse. Emma leaned in, curious. But really, what actually happened? Sophie zegt. He tricked me with that engagement rumor, said he was going out for a special dinner, and I went to check. Emma's eyes widened. You went after him? Not like that. I just wanted to understand what was going on. Emma smirked. And what happened? Sophie hesitated. He said there was never any fiancé. Emma seemed to think for a moment. So he just wanted to see what you would do? Yes. Emma laughed. He's smart. Sophie huffed. Or he just enjoys driving me crazy. Or both. Before Sophie could reply, an employee from the executive floor appeared and approached them. Sophie Bennett? She turned, surprised. Yes? Mr. Carter wants to see you in his office. Now. A chill ran down her spine. Now? Yes. She exchanged a glance with Emma, who raised her eyebrows, clearly excited about the situation unfolding. Sophie took a deep breath and headed for the elevator, mentally preparing herself for whatever was coming. When she entered William's office, she found him at his desk, as always, reviewing documents. He looked up when he saw her, closed the door. She obeyed, then sat down across from him. Did something happen? He laced his fingers together, and stared at her for a moment before speaking. "I have a proposal for you." She blinked. "That doesn't sound scary at all." He ignored the comment. "I need a date for a corporate event tomorrow night." She blinked again, not believing what she just heard. "You're asking me to be your date for an event?" "Yes." Sophie let out a nervous laugh. "Is this some kind of trap?" "You know it's not." She crossed her arms. "Why me?" "Because I need someone who isn't boring." Sophie tilted her head. Was that a compliment or an insult? "Just an observation." She took a deep breath. "I don't know if this is a good idea. The office is already full of rumors. If I show up with you at an event, they'll have me engaged by the next day. Does that bother you?" She hesitated before answering. "It bothers me that people jump to the wrong conclusions." William leaned back in his chair. "Then go and prove them wrong." Sophie realized he wasn't the kind of person who accepted refusals easily. "Is that an order?" "No. But if you say no, I'll have to take someone from the board. And honestly, I'd rather talk to you than any of them." She was surprised by his honesty. "Did you just admit that you enjoy my company?" He gave a slight smile. "I admitted that you're not boring." She considered it for a moment. "What kind of event is this?" "A business gathering. Nothing too formal." She thought a little longer and sighed. "All right. But on one condition." William raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" "You can't leave me alone there. So you want me to stay close?" She rolled her eyes. "It just means I don't want to be thrown into a sea of strangers." He nodded. "Deal." Sophie left the room feeling like she was stepping into something far more complicated than she had imagined. The next day, she spent hours trying to find the perfect outfit for the event. She wanted to look professional, but not overly formal. When she finally arrived at the venue, she found William waiting for her at the entrance. As always, he looked impeccable, but there was something different. He was looking at her in a way she couldn't quite explain. She stopped next to him. "Ready to face the evening?" He gave a slight smile. "Always." And together, they walked into the event. Sophie was sure that nothing about that night would be predictable. The event hall was grand, with enormous crystal chandeliers and perfectly arranged tables, the kind of place that made it clear Sophie didn't belong there. She glanced around, trying to appear at ease. Men and women in elegant attire moved about with wine glasses in hand, discussing investments and market strategies as if they were as simple as the weather forecast. William, on the other hand, seemed completely at home. As soon as they walked in, several people approached him to greet him, and he responded with polite nods and brief conversations. Sophie tried to maintain her composure as she followed him, but she felt every pair of eyes on her, and to make things worse, she knew exactly what those looks meant. Everyone was trying to figure out who she was, and why she was standing next to the CEO of Apex Corp. "Are you all right?" William asked, lowering his voice as he leaned slightly toward her. She took a deep breath and answered without looking at him. "I feel like someone is about to investigate me and find out I'm just an intern who spills coffee on reports." He suppressed a smile. "You underestimate your ability to stand out." She let out a dry laugh. "I'm not sure if that's a compliment or a warning." William was about to respond when an elegant woman approached them. "William, darling, it's been so long." Sophie watched the interaction with curiosity. The woman seemed much closer to William than the other guests. He smiled, though his expression remained professional. "Laura, good evening." The woman turned her gaze to Sophie, assessing her with a spark of interest in her eyes. "And who is this?" William kept his expression neutral. "Sophie Bennett, my guest for the evening." Sophie held her breath, feeling the weight of that introduction. Laura kept smiling, but her curiosity had clearly intensified. "A guest, who? Interesting." Sophie offered a polite smile. "Nice to meet you. The pleasure is all mine." The woman kept her eyes on Sophie for a moment, before turning back to William. "I see your taste for surprises remains unchanged." William didn't respond. He simply gave a faint smile. As soon as Laura walked away, Sophie let out a relieved sigh. "Who was that?" "Laura Weston. Investor. And what was that about?" It felt like she was scanning me with X-ray vision. She likes to understand what's happening around her. Sophie narrowed her eyes. "So that means she's trying to figure out what's going on between us." William looked at her with a subtle smile. "And do you think there's something going on?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. She didn't want to say anything that could be misinterpreted. Before she could come up with an intelligent response, a group of business people approached William to talk. Sophie took the opportunity to quietly slip away. She needed a moment to breathe. She walked over to the drink table and picked up a juice. As she took a sip, she heard a male voice beside her. "You're the woman of the moment." She turned and saw a tall man in a perfectly tailored suit, looking at her with an intrigued smile. "Excuse me?" Everyone here is trying to figure out who you are." She gave a polite smile. "There's not much to figure out. Hard to believe that when you show up with William Carter." She narrowed her eyes. "Do you know him well?" "Well enough to know he doesn't usually bring a date to events." She took another sip of her juice and glanced around as if looking for a distraction. "And who are you?" "Apologies. Where are my manners?" He extended his hand. "Nathan Pierce. I work in the tech sector." She shook his hand. "Sophie Bennett, intern at Apex Corp." "Right." She blinked, surprised. "How do you know that?" He gave a knowing smirk. "Let's just say I have good sources." Sophie didn't have time to process that information because, in the next instant, William appeared beside them. His expression serious. "Pierce. Carter." The two exchanged a tense look, as if there was a complicated history between them. Sophie immediately felt the shift in the atmosphere. "You two already know each other?" Nathan kept his smile. "Let's just say we've worked on opposite sides a few times." William didn't look away. "And we still do." Sophie felt it was best to stay out of that conversation. Nathan picked up a glass of wine from the table and looked at her. "It was a pleasure meeting you, Sophie. I hope we run into each other again." Then, with one last glance at William, he walked away. Sophie remained silent for a moment before turning to William. "What was that?" "Nothing you need to worry about. You clearly don't like him." William crossed his arms. "Nathan likes to stir things up. He always tries to insert himself into other people's business. And I'm someone's business now?" He held her gaze for a moment before answering. "You're my intern." She folded her arms. "That doesn't answer my question." He let out a deep breath and ran a hand through his hair, looking frustrated with himself. "I just don't like when he gets too close." Sophie wasn't sure how to interpret that, but before she could press further, a new round of greetings began, pulling her back into the flow of the event. The evening passed in a blur of formal conversations and subtle glances between her and William. He never left her alone for too long, as if he was always keeping an eye on anyone who tried to get too close. When they finally left, Sophie felt relieved to leave the formal setting behind. In the car, the silence between them felt heavier than usual. She decided to break it. "So, Nathan Pierce seems to enjoy provoking you." William kept his eyes on the road. "He likes to test limits." She leaned slightly toward him. "And what exactly was he trying to test with me?" William glanced at her for a second before responding. "That's something only he can answer." Sophie realized she wouldn't get anything more out of him that night. She sighed and looked out the window. That night had been more revealing than she expected, and now, more than ever, she felt like she was caught up in a game she was only beginning to understand. The morning after the event, Sophie woke up with a strange feeling. It wasn't just the fact that she had spent the night surrounded by business executives, that she had been analyzed like some kind of mystery. Something about that night still lingered in her mind, the tension between William and Nathan Pierce. She had never seen William so closed off and protective before. Of course, he was always reserved and in control, but at the event, he had been different. From the moment Nathan approached her, William became more alert, more intense, and that made her curious. When she arrived at the office, she noticed that the rumors had only grown stronger. "So our dear intern has been promoted to the CEO's official date." One colleague teased, "He's never taken anyone to an event before." "Are you sure there's nothing more going on?" Emma whispered beside her. Sophie rolled her eyes. "Don't you all have work to do?" "We do, but gossip is more interesting." Shaking her head, she made her way to her desk, determined to ignore the chatter. But her determination didn't last long. A few minutes after sitting down, a new email notification popped up. Subject: CEO's office. Now, Sophie's heart skipped a beat. She closed her laptop, grabbed her notebook, and walked up to the executive floor. When she entered William's office, he was already waiting for her. "Close the door." She did as he asked, but crossed her arms. "This sounds serious." He looked up from his documents and motioned toward the chair in front of him. "Sit down." She sat, feeling the tension in the air. "What is it?" William leaned back in his chair and watched her for a moment before speaking. "Nathan Pierce called me this morning." Sophie blinked in surprise. "And what did he want?" "He asked about you." She frowned. "About me?" "Yes. He wants to offer you a job at his company." Her eyes widened. "What?" William kept his expression serious. "He wants you to work for him." Sophie fell silent for a moment, trying to process what she had just heard. "But why?" "He thinks you have potential." She let out a nervous laugh. "That doesn't make sense. I'm just an intern." William narrowed his eyes. "Do you really believe that?" She hesitated. "Well, yes." He shook his head. "Sophie, you don't realize the impact you have." She blushed slightly. "You're exaggerating." He studied her for a moment before continuing. Do you plan to accept the offer? Sophie frowned. Do you want me to? William didn't answer right away. His gaze remained fixed on her, as if assessing her reaction. I want to know what you want. She sighed and leaned back in her chair. I don't know. It all happened so fast, and I don't even trust Nathan. William nodded. Then we're on the same page. She looked at him carefully. Why do I feel like you already knew he was going to do this? He rested his elbows on the table. Nathan never does anything without an ulterior motive. He's trying to use you to get to me. Sophia swallowed hard. This sounds more serious than I thought. Because it is. Silence settled between them. Finally, Sophie took a deep breath and smiled. I guess I should get ready for another chapter in this corporate soap opera. William smirked. You've been part of it for a long time. She stood up, still processing their conversation. Don't worry, William, I'm not going anywhere. He nodded, and for the first time, he seemed to relax a little. Sophie left William's office with her heart racing. What had once been a game of teasing and misunderstandings now felt much more serious. Nathan Pierce wasn't just trying to recruit her. He wanted to use her against William. And the question that wouldn't leave her mind was, why? The rest of the day dragged on. Sophie tried to focus on her work, but her thoughts kept drifting back to her conversation with William. He seemed more concerned than she had ever seen him before, as if for the first time, something had truly slipped out of his control, and for some reason, that unsettled her. It was already late when she realized she was still at the office. Most people had left, and only a few lights remained on. Then she heard a noise. When she turned around, she saw William standing in the doorway, watching her. You're still here? He asked. She smiled, trying to lighten the mood. I could ask you the same thing. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. I had some documents to review, but it looks like you also lost track of time. She sighed and leaned back in her chair. I just needed to clear my head. William was quiet for a moment before walking over and sitting in the chair next to her. Want to talk? She smiled, surprised by his tone. Is that an invitation to vent? Only if you want to. She looked at him for a moment, trying to understand why this man, who always seemed so distant, now seemed willing to listen. It's about everything, she finally said. The event, the rumors, Nathan. I don't even know how I ended up here. William nodded slowly. The truth is, you were always at the center of it, even if you didn't realize it. That doesn't make me feel any better. He gave a faint smile. But it means you're not as invisible as you think. She took a deep breath and lowered her gaze. You were really worried when Nathan offered me a job, weren't you? He hesitated for a second before answering. Yes. Why? He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the table. Because I know what he's capable of. She frowned. You talk like he's some kind of movie villain. William let out a low chuckle. He's not a villain, but he plays to win, and he's figured something out about you that he can use against me. Sophie blinked. And what exactly did he figure out? He held her gaze for a long moment before answering. That you're important to me. Sophie's heart skipped a beat. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. William kept his eyes on her, waiting. She felt her face heat up. Are you joking? He shook his head. I've never been more serious. The silence settled between them, filled with something Sophie couldn't quite define. Finally, William stood up and put his hands in his pockets. It's late. I'll take you home. She hesitated for a second, still trying to process everything that had happened in the past few minutes. But for some reason, she didn't want to be alone. Okay. They walked out of the office together, and for the first time, the silence between them didn't feel uncomfortable. On the contrary, it felt like something had finally changed, and Sophie knew that after that night, nothing would ever be the same again. The silence between Sophie and William that night spoke louder than any conversation. Something had shifted between them, and she knew she couldn't ignore it anymore. The problem was, what should she do with this new realization? The following days were strangely normal, which only made the tension between them grow. William didn't bring up Nathan again, nor the event, nor anything he had told her that night in the office. But Sophie noticed the looks, the moments when he hesitated before leaving her office. As if he was about to say something but changed his mind. Until one day, it happened. Sophie was in the middle of her work, organizing a report, when she received an email with no subject. Can you meet me on the rooftop in 10 minutes? She frowned. It wasn't something she usually received, especially not from William, but for some reason, her heart started beating faster. She tried to act naturally as she left the office and made her way to the rooftop. When she opened the door, the cold wind hit her face, and then she saw William standing there, his back turned to her, looking out over the city. You called me? She asked, hesitant. He turned around slowly, and for the first time, Sophie noticed that he looked nervous. Yes. She crossed her arms. All right. What's going on? He took a deep breath and stepped closer. I've spent the last few days trying to find the best way to say this. She frowned. Say what? And then, before she could react, William reached into his pocket and got down on one knee. Sophie's heart stopped. Literally stopped. What? What are you doing? He held a small black box in his hand and opened it to reveal a diamond ring shining in the sunlight. I'm asking you to marry me. Sophie blinked, then blinked again. Did you hit your head somewhere? William laughed, but his expression remained serious. No. Is this some kind of joke? Sophie. She covered her face with her hands for a second before looking at him again. William, are you sure about this? He took her hand. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Sophie felt a wave of emotion wash over her. But why? He smiled softly. Because you make me laugh. Because you challenge me. Because since you walked into my life, everything has been more interesting. She let out a nervous laugh. That sounds more like a job offer than a marriage proposal. He shook his head, laughing too. Sophie Bennett, will you marry me? She looked at him, still stunned, then at the ring, and suddenly, she knew the answer. Yes. William smiled, slipped the ring onto her finger, and in one quick motion stood up and pulled her into a kiss that nearly made her knees give out. The office staff, who had quietly gathered to watch from the rooftop's glass doors, erupted into cheers and applause. Sophie pulled away from William just enough to look at her co-workers. Horrified. You were watching? Emma grinned. Of course. This is a historic event. William just laughed, keeping Sophie close. I guess there's no more doubt about the rumors now. She rolled her eyes but smiled. Yes, but at least this time, the rumors are true. The wedding happened a few months later, and it was exactly how Sophie never imagined it would be perfect. She had never dreamed of a lavish wedding, but William insisted he wanted something memorable, so they found a middle ground. It was an outdoor ceremony with elegant but simple decor. White flowers and soft lights created a warm and charming atmosphere. Sophie wore a simple yet stunning dress and felt like her entire life had led her to this moment. As she walked down the aisle toward William, her heart raced more than ever. He was there, waiting for her with that look that made everything worthwhile. The vows were heartfelt, and of course, had a touch of humor. When it was Sophie's turn, she held William's hand and said, I promise to love you on good days and bad. I promise to always carry an allergy pill in case you order shrimp without realizing it. Everyone laughed, including William. He smiled before answering, and I promise to love you in every moment, even when you decide to reorganize my pen drawer without my permission. The audience burst into laughter. When they finally said the long-awaited I do and kissed, Sophie felt as if the entire world disappeared for a moment. Now they were officially husband and wife, and nothing could be better than that, or at least that's what she thought. A year later, life was completely different. Sophie and William were married, happy, and balancing work and personal life perfectly. And then came the news that would change everything. Sophie stared at the pregnancy test for a long moment. She blinked, took a deep breath, and looked again. The result hadn't changed. She was pregnant. Her heart raced. How would she tell William? He would be home from work in just a few minutes, and she knew she wouldn't be able to keep it a secret for long. So she decided to do it in the most creative way possible. When William arrived home, he found Sophie sitting on the couch with an envelope in her hands. What's this? He asked, taking off his jacket and sitting beside her. She smiled and handed him the envelope. A little surprise. He opened it and pulled out a piece of paper. He read it out loud. Congratulations. You've been promoted to daddy. He blinked a few times, trying to process it. Then he looked at her, eyes wide. Are you serious? Sophie nodded, biting her lip, trying to hold back her emotions, and then William pulled her into a tight hug. I can't believe it. She laughed, feeling tears of joy roll down her face. I didn't believe it either until I checked the test 3 times. He pulled back just enough to hold her face in his hands and kissed her softly. You just made me the happiest man in the world. Sophie smiled, feeling her heart swell with happiness. Well, you better get ready. Looks like our life is about to get even crazier. William chuckled, and I can't wait for it. She hugged him again, feeling whole in a way she never imagined possible. And in that moment, she knew for sure her chaos had found a home, and his name was William Carter.